longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teal. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on caregiversolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teal, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Good evening and welcome to Caregiver Solutions Info Show. I'm your host, Marcia Teal, and I'm glad that you could join us this evening. We are continuing and expanding on National Caregiving Month. That's because there's so many caregivers out there, and we want to celebrate them and honor them for all the work that they do and all the care that they give, because these family caregivers are unpaid family caregivers, and they do it out of love for their loved one and the person that they're caring for. As a matter of fact, according to the latest statistics by the Alzheimer's Association, there are so many caregivers being born, so to speak, every day, because there's so many cases of Alzheimer's disease coming along, every few seconds. It's staggering, actually, to know that the Alzheimer's disease is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. And that being said, there is 5.8 million caregivers in the United States taking care of people with Alzheimer's. And by the year 2050, there's going to be 14 million people in the United States that are suffering from Alzheimer's or some other related dementia. So we want to celebrate and share stories of caregivers so other caregivers can learn, because sometimes the best way to learn is by sharing our stories. And by sharing our stories, people understand that they're not alone, that someone else is going down that same path and somebody else is walking in your shoes. And I think it's fair to say that caregivers in general experience a lot of the same type of feelings, although every situation is different. But caregivers go through the same kind of feelings as their caregiving journey, goes along. But every situation is different depending upon a lot of factors, of course. So I think by sharing our stories, by having a conversation, people can learn lessons, they can pick up tips, they can realize that they have others that can be there to support them and people that they can connect to. So the stories connect us. The stories show us that we have hope. And that's really, really important, because in this COVID time that we're having now, we want to keep hope with all the caregivers out there. If we don't have hope, we don't have much. And so, again, welcome to the show. We're going to be talking to a family caregiver. She's a daughter. Her mother has dementia, and she's going to talk about that today. And she's going to share her story of how her journey began. And so joining me today is Celia Henry, and I want to welcome you to the show. Hi, Celia.
Hi. It's nice to be here.
Well, glad that you are here to share your story. We are sharing our stories, and you agreed to share your story. And why? Why did you agree to talk about your story today?
Well, I think it's because what I find is there are so many people, as you just said, facing this issue. I mean, obviously, I'm kind of at the age, I'm at the generation where, I'm in my early 60s. So there's so many of us that are facing the difficult decisions that we have to make regarding our aging parents, and particularly our parents that have been diagnosed with some type of dementia, Alzheimer's. And so I felt like, hey, if I can help anyone, that's great, because it's a tough road. It's hard, and we all need support. We all need to feel, okay, there's somebody else out there that has experienced that, and I know there's just so many. So, I have been able to form a community with other daughters, sons of moms and dads that are having dementia, and that's been so important for me.
Well, I'm glad that you're here to share your story tonight. And so you have a mom who has dementia. So I kind of want to go to the beginning of your story and see how your journey began. The question is, when did you start seeing signs that something wasn't quite right with mom, where things were off, where you started questioning something? So if you can go back to that beginning and share that with us, that would be great.
Sure. My mom was a very organized, together woman. And so the first indicators for us, and I have 3 siblings, so there's 4 of us all together. The first indicators were her inability to accomplish tasks. Even, she was an amazing cook. She would throw huge dinner parties. And you could see little by little she was struggling just to put on a dinner for our family. And that, she could do that at the drop of a hat. So the organizational skills, she couldn't get her checkbook, couldn't pay her bills. Sit down, pay her bills, and organizationally. That was one of the first indicators that things were slipping. And then, unfortunately, she began to progress to some, what we were told was sundowning, where she would start to get very restless in the evenings, very forgetful. And then for my mom, and this is obviously not true for everyone, she began to have some hallucinations, really. She thought that there were people in the house. She was calling the police. And at this time, she was living alone. And so we knew, okay, we've got to do something here.
Yeah, some of that's pretty scary, right? To think that very scary for the family. And so when all of this was happening, did all of your siblings get together and talk about what was going on? And if they did, what were they saying?
Yes, we did all get together. And just started brainstorming, okay, what are the options at this point? My mom and my sister in particular went and visited a few places and just, tried to get some ideas. We looked into, having caregivers come into the home. And my mom did not want to do that. She was very adamant, because she didn't realize the extent of her need. We began to think about, could she live with any of the siblings, any of the 4 kids? And if so, how would we do that? So we brainstormed a lot of things, trying to figure out what would be the best thing for her. And ultimately, we were not very wise. I think we didn't realize the extent of her dementia. And we moved her into a senior high-rise that just offered some services, like somebody to check on you once a day. So, and that didn't work too well.
Yeah, for a lot of reasons, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. When she first started not being able to function, to be able to pay her bills or to organize the dinner, they call that executive functioning. Did you also notice any memory loss, like more like she was forgetting things?
We did. It was not as apparent, partly because my mom is very smart, and I think she hid some of her memory loss from us, which I know sounds funny, like how could she do that? But see, I didn't live locally, my sister didn't live locally, so we weren't there with her on a daily basis to see, and my brothers were not as observant. So, and not to say that men are not observant, but yes, there was definitely memory loss, grasping for words, those types of things that we could see.
So at this point, and you all are talking and noticing all of these things, and you're assuming it's dementia, had anyone at this point had any experience or exposure to something like this in the family or elsewhere up to this point?
No, we really had not. None of us were very well educated on the subject. We hadn't experienced it with anyone else in our family, so it was a whole new ballgame for us.
Right. So now you're dealing with something you've never had to deal with before, no experience with it, really no knowledge about it. At what point did you decide to get her to a doctor to find out what was really going on?
That was early on. We took her to a neurologist, and they did all the typical tests. I went with her for some of them. My brother did, where they do the clock and the all sorts of just standard tests that they do. And they provided the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And at that point, there was also a Lewy body component for her as well. And that was more of the, as that progressed, more of the hallucinations and things like that.
So once she received the official diagnosis, was it more fearful for the family, or was it sort of like a relief knowing what was wrong with her?
I think I would say it was more of a relief, because then we could research and educate ourselves, and there's some wonderful resources out there, and we began to understand the disease. And I think that's so helpful for us, but also for my mom. It was so helpful. You learn, don't say, oh, don't you remember that? Or who's this? And put them on the spot. These things that you learn, just to be compassionate and understanding of what they're experiencing and how you can best help.
And that's what it's all about. Unfortunately, caregivers have to learn as they go most times, because most of them are in the same boat that you and your family were, with no prior experience or exposure to the disease, and you have to learn as you go. So it's a tough road. And at this point, we're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back. Stay with us.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help, because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides.
We're back, and we are still celebrating National Caregiver Month and honoring and celebrating the many unpaid family caregivers out there. And joining me today is a caregiver, a family caregiver for her mom. I'm with Celia Henry, and she's sharing her story in the hopes that others can learn from lessons that she learned along the way. So, Celia, thank you for being here. You mentioned that you finally got Mom to a neurologist, and he gave the official diagnosis that Mom had some diagnosis of Alzheimer's with some underlying Lewy body type dementia too. At this point, what was your mom thinking? Did they tell your mom directly to her that she had Alzheimer's? Were you up front? Was the doctor up front? How did your mom feel about the news if she was actually told?
We were upfront about it. I think my mom was also largely uneducated about dementia and Alzheimer's, and I don't think she fully grasped the impact of it. But she was afraid. I think that was one of the biggest thing that we experienced with her was that she was fearful, and she would express concern, about her future and say things like, "What's happening to me?" Things like that. And it's so sad and so hard to see that.
Yeah, not knowing what's going to happen to you, and you have that diagnosis, and then no one can really say, because we kind of know how it progresses, but everybody walks down that road in a different way. So tell me about your mom before dementia diagnosis. Tell me about her. What was her personality like? I know she could throw dinner parties, so she must have been social, but can you tell me a little bit more about her personality?
Yes, my mom was very social. She's like an old line Southern belle. She had this Southern accent, and life was all about her home and her family. She was a full-time mom and homemaker, and she was a wonderful homemaker. She was always, decorating the home, every single holiday, everything was decorated. She was a very detail-oriented person. So a perfectionist, if you will. She would, when she put up our Christmas tree, she would put, what are those things called? Icicles? One at a time, all the way around that tree. I mean, hours she would spend doing that. But everything was done well. Everything was done right. She was very bright. She was not educated, but she was very smart. And she was a fun person. But everything she did well. But certainly, she excelled in hospitality,
I can relate to that. My mother's very similar to your mom, where with the icicles, one at a time on the tree. If we, as kids, tried to throw a bunch on, that was a no-no, and so I know all about that. So after a while, and she's living with the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease now, how has that changed her? What have you noticed has changed in her personality to this point right now?
Well, we are several years in to the diagnosis now, and she really does not have the capability to decide to do most anything or organize herself to do most anything. She's very extremely reliant upon her caregivers. She cannot make decisions, and I've noticed that for a long time. There came a point pretty early on where I would take her, go to a restaurant. She could not peruse the menu. She couldn't decide what she wanted. I would have to just say, "Oh, you know what? I know you really like this. We're going to get this. Let's get that. Remember, you liked it last time." Because she cannot make a decision. If I would take her to the mall to go shopping, she would say, "Now, do you know how to get out of here? Because I don't know how we get back out of here." So there was. She She used to be so independent, very independent, and now, you know, she can't, that independence is gone. And I think that's a huge change for her. And she's not nearly as social. That was another indicator, I just thought of this early on, is that she began to withdraw socially. So she would not initiate any social plans. Now, if somebody, a friend of hers, you know, initiated, planned it, came and got her, okay, she was happy and she did it, but she couldn't initiate. So that was a very big difference. And that's the way she is now.
So because she was so social and she liked to entertain, I'm assuming she had many friends, girlfriends. Did you notice as her dementia worsened that the girlfriends kind of went away, or were some of them there through thick and thin?
I noticed both. Her oldest and dearest friends were there through thick and thin. They were wonderful, and they understood what was going on, and they were very supportive and very kind. I mean, people who were not, you know, the oldest and dearest friends, they kind of just went on their way, because it's easier just to not deal with it and not see the changes.
So as a family, you all decided that you couldn't take Mom into your own home. You looked at that possibility, but what were some of the reasons that you decided against that?
Well, each of us, for me personally, I was still working full-time, and I am still working full-time. I have 2 children and 3 grandchildren that all live close by, that I'm very involved with. And also, just in terms of, there were so many reasons. We had literally just downsized into our, you know, retirement size home. So, you know, we didn't even really have appropriate room. And then for me personally, it was, and I learned this through having her with me for some periods of time before we placed her. I just couldn't do it. I wasn't cut out for it. It was too stressful for me, and I feel extremely guilty saying that. And at the time, I felt extremely guilty, and I still feel guilty, you know, because you feel like, well, I should be able to do that for my mom. And I know we weighed back and forth of whether to have, you know, obviously we could have care come in and help during the day while we're working. And we weighed all of that, and we looked at a lot of different things. And each of my siblings, you know, my sister was also working full time, and she lived up in Mississippi. So that would have meant, you know, moving my mom very far away, and she would be far away from all the other siblings. And so there were a lot of different things that we looked at. And ultimately, when we started looking at the options, we felt like a facility that catered to dementia care, memory care, would be so good, because you would have the community and you would have the activities that were going on all day during the day, rather than sitting at my house alone while I'm at work or with a caregiver and watching TV or doing whatever, that she could be surrounded by community and that she could be participating in activities. And we just felt like that was the best thing for her.
You mentioned a second ago that you felt that you weren't cut out to be a caregiver. Can you remember something that happened or some circumstances when you came to that realization, or some of the feelings that you were feeling when you were trying to be her caregiver?
I think, yeah, because I would have her in my home for some periods of time. I took her on some trips, you know, even after she was getting pretty bad. And it's just, for me personally, it was just so draining, because you feel like their need is 24/7. They're so reliant on you. And I think for me, and then, even just in terms of, I don't want to be inappropriate, but, having accidents, when I took her out to a restaurant and we had an accident, and then having an accident here, and trying to get into the shower and trying to do these different things. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't know how to do all this. and just, her anxiety, because that disease it makes them often feel anxious. They're agitated. They're not quite sure what's going on. And for some people, and I think that was true for me, it's kind of catching. And I couldn't separate very well from that.
Well, that's true, because when you're the primary caregiver and she stayed with you and spent a great deal of time with you in the beginning, you do feed off of each other. And the person with the dementia kind of feeds off the caregiver, but you just mentioned that you as a caregiver kind of fed off of your mom's anxiety too, because she was, anxious, and you caught on and kind of mirrored her. So it kind of works both ways. And so if you have someone who's anxious or angry or frustrated or any of those other feelings, even sadness, it can affect the other one, especially if you're connected like you are with a mother-daughter bond. It's going to be catching, as you say, and therefore, you are both in it, and it's almost like you all as a unit need another caregiver to take care of both of you almost.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a break to thank our sponsor, and when we come back, Celia is going to share more of her journey of some of the decisions, good or bad, that she made along the way to help her mom through her journey with Alzheimer's disease. We'll be right back.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help, because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides.
Welcome back. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our national sponsor, Arden Courts Memory Care Communities. Arden Courts is a leader in memory care because memory care is all they do. They have 51 locations throughout the United States, and they're there for the person that has memory loss as well as for the family caregiver. Today, they'd like to offer you this free book. It's called The 36-Hour Day. It's a wonderful resource for family caregivers. It details all the information regarding dementia, the different types of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body, frontal temporal lobe dementia, vascular dementia, Parkinson's disease type dementia, so that you can learn. And it's a great resource to learn, and also has a lot of tips about how to handle certain situations. The book is yours for free, just for the asking, because you're watching the show or listening on the iHeartRadio app or local Southeast Florida radio. All you need to do to get this book is just send an email. That email address is delray@arden-courts.com. DELRAY, delray@arden-courts.com. Send an email with your name, address, and telephone number, telling them that you saw the promotion on the Caregiver show and that you would like to get this 36-hour day book mailed to you. And they'll be very, very happy to send it to you. So don't delay, get it. It's great for yourself or for a loved one that you may be knowing that they're struggling, and this could be helpful to them, as well as listening to this program every Tuesday from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So we are celebrating National Caregiver Month, continuing with that theme. And with me today is a family caregiver, Celia Henry, whose mother has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease several years ago. And she's sharing her story in the hopes that other people can learn from what she learned and maybe do better, learn more. I think the more we're educated, the better and maybe even easier our journey can be, if that's possible. So Celia, thank you again for sharing about your mom. You said before the break at one point that once mom couldn't live by herself and the siblings decided that it was impossible to have her come into their home, you had to make a decision to keep her safe and to give her those social opportunities that she was craving. And you mentioned briefly that one of the first things that you all decided to do was have her go into a high-rise senior type building. Tell me a little bit about that and what happened.
Well, there's several reasons that we made that decision. First, my mother was very resistant to going really anywhere, even though she didn't want to have caregivers in her home. So we kind of thought this is sort of a intermediate step, if you will, going from her, beautiful, large home into this high-rise, and this was in Orlando, and it was a very nice place where she had a one-bedroom apartment, and that was a huge shock for her and a huge change for her and a lot for her to adjust to, believe it or not. I mean, because her home was so important to her. So we did that, and we said, well, there's services here. They're going to check on her. They're going to come and give her meds every day, because she was at that point obviously forgetting, to take her medications and things like that. We thought, well, maybe this will be a good intermediate step, and it's something that she can accept. And it was very nice, and they did have activities there and things like that, but she was lost there. She was not able at that point to live independently, and we just didn't realize the extent of her needs. And as she lived there, it became more and more apparent, because she was, again, more withdrawing, more isolating, because she couldn't navigate through the normal settings, and she was forgetting things. She was, again, thinking that people could hear what she was saying in her apartment, that things were coming through the walls. And then, she ran down the hallway one night to her neighbors and knocked on the door and said, someone's in my apartment, when no one was. And at that point, obviously, we're like, okay, yikes. We've got to make some very difficult decisions at this point, because she's not safe and she's scared, and we don't want her living like that. And so at that point, we had to begin to look at specifically memory care facilities, assisted living, and figure out, okay, where's a place that she's going to be comfortable and safe.
So Celia, mom being more of in an independent place where you felt like people were going to be around, and she did have some services, but you mentioned she couldn't navigate a normal day. Did that mean that she had trouble maybe finding the elevator and going downstairs to the dining room and finding her spot there? Did she have trouble doing that?
She was not at that point yet. It was more of an ability to think about the day and articulate in a normal day there because it was beyond her. They would have opportunities, but she couldn't figure out how to take advantage of those opportunities. So they would say, oh, we're going to have a card club down in, the grand ballroom at 10 o'clock. She couldn't, that didn't happen. Even though she was interested in it, she never was able to take advantage of that unless someone was there, and said, okay, let's go together and we'll do that.
And even with that, if someone were to come and get her and take her and show her and invite her and welcome her, even with that, it's possible that she would refuse that for the reason that when people are at this stage of their disease, they're afraid to maybe make a mistake. And a lot of times they don't want to put themselves in a compromising position where people are going to be looking at them and expecting them maybe to answer a question or make the right move on a card game or participate in a normal way. And they realize at some point that that's scary for them. And so rather than put themselves in that position to be judged or to be embarrassed, they just won't do it. And that could be another reason.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree that that's what was happening with my mom. She did not want to put herself in the position to be embarrassed.
Yeah. So how long did she live in this particular independent senior living place?
I think it was only 3 or 4 months. And
okay,
then we
so
had the...
Yeah, it didn't take long. It didn't take long.
Yeah.
It didn't. Sometimes, when the environment, when the new environment is not the right place, it's pretty evident early on if the person's not acclimating and not being successful in their new environment and adapting to their new environment. You mentioned that your siblings and yourself, didn't realize how much deficit mom had. Do you think your personal feelings prevented you from seeing how she really was, or was it because you didn't understand the signs and symptoms and what they meant in the disease?
I think it's a little of both. Definitely there was a lack of understanding of the disease on all of our parts. But I do think it was also, we are so accustomed to our mom being the strong one and being independent. And I do think that she hid as much as possible these things from us. And so it was both of those things, I think, contributed.
So you talked about your mom.
See it.
I'm sorry?
And sometimes maybe you just don't want to see it. So you don't see it.
That's right, because it's hard to accept, especially someone like your mom who, had it all together and was very independent. It's hard to accept seeing them decline. It's very difficult, and of course that's certainly natural for some people to experience that, and therefore, comes in the guilt that you mentioned earlier about having to then, find more appropriate care for her. That's very, very, normal, but these are things that are going to be helpful for other caregivers, to point out some of these decisions that you made and the why, the what for, what happened type of things, because I think it just opens up the reality of the situation, because sometimes, it doesn't feel real sometimes, and you hope so much, but hoping doesn't really change the situation. So, it is very common what your family did, because a lot of families start with the least, type of care, hoping that they can adapt and that can get them through a longer period of time until they realize, obviously it's not going to happen. So then you were forced with getting more care. Now, you are an attorney, and so I know that, you are someone that checks everything out and, is good at asking questions and investigating. So how long did it take you or your family before you found more appropriate accommodations for your mom?
Well, in our particular situation, my two brothers live in Orlando, and my mother had always lived in Orlando. And so the first place that we located for her was in Orlando, and it was a facility that had assisted living and memory care in the same facility. And again, we started out in the assisted living side. I don't know why at this point it seemed like should have been obvious. And I guess it was just we wanted so much for her to have the highest level of living that she could. But again, that did not last very long. And they said she really needs to go over into the memory care side of things. And so we sent her on over there. And for me, I'm here in Palm Beach Gardens. My mom is in Orlando. I'm driving up, almost every week, trying to spend time with her, to be there, to check in. And my brothers are not, in my opinion, they're not seeing her enough, giving her enough day-to-day support in this new place. And so at that point, I began to research and say, I need my mom down here by me, where I can be actively involved on a day-to-day basis, where even though she's not living with me, I am there as a support, as a caregiver, as someone who's actively involved in her life on a day-to-day basis. And so that's when I started just researching the different facilities that were here, what was available, and that, for us, I learned about art and courts, and I just loved the concepts that they had there, and just in terms of the memory care is all we do. To me, that was very, very important, because I wanted to know that the people that were caring for my mom understood her disease, and they would treat her with kindness and compassion, and not just say, well, I already told you that, which is easy to do when somebody's asking you the same thing over and over and over and over again. So that was the progression for me personally.
And so when you were doing your search, besides how somebody related to your mom and understood, was there anything else that was important to you as far as a place, what it looked like, or anything else that was important to you in your search?
There were, because again, my mom is very picky, and her surroundings were very important to her. So we wanted to find a place that was nice. I know this is silly, but was clean and was that she could be comfortable in. But really an important thing for me, and we went and we looked in these huge, beautiful brand new places, and I'm like, oh, this is so nice. But the reality of that is that my mother would have been lost in a place like that. She would not be able to remember how to get back to her room. And so one of the things that drew me to art and courts was the layout, really, that there's 4 different hallways there. And so you learn your own, this is my hallway, and I have my own living room here, and I have my own dining room here, and I sit at the dining room table with the same people every day. And I know I'm comfortable. I know how to go down this hall. And if I want to, and sit in the living room and watch TV with the other residents, or I can stay in my own room. I mean, those things were very important to me. The the fact that they had activities all day long, things that they could participate in and could at least stimulate their minds as much as possible, to hopefully hang on to as much as you can for as long as you can, to stimulate their mind and have something to do and people to be around and to feel you're part of a community. And to me, that was what drew me there, was the concept of it's like a home.
So did it take your mom a long time to completely transition to the new environment? Did she do it easily, or was it harder for her to, at this point, acclimate?
I think she did a pretty good job of acclimating fairly quickly. And I don't want to say part of that. Well, I think part of it is that I was able to be in and out of there all the time. I mean, I would stop, at all times of the day or night. I built relationships not only with her, but with the people that she lived with, her next door neighbor, the lady across the hall, and we built a community there for her. And we were very fortunate that she had a couple of ladies that she got to know well, and they hung out, they would go out of their room together and go down to the activity room together, and they would come back for lunch together. And that was very important because it was relationship. And I think that's part of what they strive to build there, because when we were deciding, okay, where in this facility is my mom going to be, we looked at, who were some people that she could fit in with that were kind of at her level, and that made such a huge difference in her experience there. And I was able to gain strength and comfort from the lady across the hall. I became very, very good friends with her daughter, who was my exact age. I mean, we had so much in common. And so we checked not only on our mom, but on our friend's mom. So I always felt that if I wasn't there, Cindy's there. If Cindy wasn't there, I was there. We're both checking on our moms and just hanging with them and giving them support and encouragement. And it's really, really, really nice.
So looking back on this journey, we've been talking about your caregiving journey with your mom from beginning to current. And looking back, would you do anything differently?
Well, I think we would have skipped the high-rise senior living because that was well, and maybe you just have to learn as you go, and that is part of life. We learn from our mistakes. We learn. Beyond that, I think I'm comfortable with what we've done. I think we could have educated ourselves a little better. And it was one of the things that I think is challenging is trying to accommodate your loved ones' desires and respect them and give them a voice. And then balancing that with, but they don't have the capability to make those decisions. And I've often likened Alzheimer's journey to, they're sort of returning to almost a toddlerhood. And so you wouldn't place responsibilities on a toddler of making these important, hard decisions because they're not capable of making those decisions. And I think that it was hard for us to just step in and say, no, this is what's best. We need to do this. And so we were slow, I think, in doing that. And it's hard. It's hard to do that because you want to give your parent the respect that they deserve and the dignity. So, but I do think that I probably should have been a little more vocal and a little more involved in decision making.
So that being said, because you have 3 siblings, there's 4 children in the family, did everybody always agree on everything and the decisions, or did you have disagreements and have to kind of convince the others what the best thing for mom, because nobody probably ever expected this was going to happen. So did you all come together as a unit, or were there some decision making that others really didn't care for?
I think we were very fortunate, because I have other friends who have had terrible, terrible times with their siblings because they don't agree, and it's very difficult. My siblings and I were pretty much in agreement. Quite frankly, I think my siblings were happy for me to take the lead and bring my mom down here. If they're watching, I don't think they'll mind me saying that. So I think we were fortunate in that regard, that we all knew that we had to find the right place for my mom, and we all worked together. We all visited. We sat together in the facility and looked at it and talked to her and tried to get her on board and make her feel that she was being heard as well. So we were very fortunate that we were able to kind of have a good consensus.
I like what you said about having to make those decisions for a parent because they can't make them for themselves when they have dementia and they're not cognitively able to understand what's best for them, and that can be really tough sometimes when they don't know what's going to happen. So when your mom didn't want to have someone in the house and didn't want to leave her home, how did you handle that?
That was for us, the important thing was all four siblings coming together and sitting with her and kind of presenting a united front. And I know that she wasn't happy about it, but when she saw the four of us in agreement, she went along. But it was hard. It was hard.
Yeah. And once your mom was in the appropriate environment where she received the memory care support, do you think she felt herself relieved a little bit? Do you feel like she sort of felt that she was home again, where she felt safe and felt comfortable and was relieved that she didn't have to be afraid anymore?
Yes, I definitely saw that with her. Even though, she would make comments here or there, I could see that she was so much more at peace, that she felt safe, that she felt stable, that she knew she was okay. And I definitely saw a difference in her, a big difference.
And once your mom has the peace, it gives the family members peace of mind, knowing that she's okay and she feels safe and comfortable and she gets what she needs. And then everybody can take a big, deep breath and say, okay, we're good.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing your story with us this evening about your mom and your journey on this terrible disease, this path that so many caregivers find themselves in. I appreciate you telling your story, sharing family details, and I know it's not always easy, but in the vein of helping others, I applaud you, and thank you for being such a great caregiver, and thank you for sharing with others to help. So I hope you have a good evening, and thanks again for being with us, Celia.
I'm so happy to have been with you. Thank you so much.
And thank you to everybody who tuned in. We'll be back next week with more shows, either on iHeartRadio under WNN or on the streaming at www.caregiversolutions.info. So everyone, I hope you have a good evening. Stay safe. And in the meantime, give somebody, we have to do it virtually now. Give somebody a virtual hug, unless you're living with them, and stay safe. We'll see you all next time. Good night.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teal. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week